Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here again, and it's a privilege to have with us Major Russ Cooper. Russ, thanks for joining us today. Very much appreciated. We're not too far apart physically today. I'm in Gatineau, and I believe you're in Ottawa. But
Yeah, in the Ottawa area. Great to be
yeah,
with you in the region, Rod.
and I'm heading off to Montreal after we have this interview. So, Major Russ Cooper, for those who have not heard him on other previous broadcasts, is the founder, the board chair, the president, and the CEO of Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, C3RF. Major Cooper is retired from both the Royal Canadian Air Force and from Air Canada. In his military career, he was a decorated CF-18 combat pilot in Iraq and Kuwait, and served in several staff positions as Director of Major Capital Acquisition Projects. In the civilian aviation sector, he served as an international airliner pilot with national responsibilities in the field of post-9/11 civil aviation security. He has published internationally in this latter area. And now fully retired from his follow-on career as a human factors engineer and a Transport Canada flight test pilot delegate, he has a new career, I'm guessing it's an unpaid one, defending fundamental Canadian charter rights through the C3RF. His energy and passion for this cause is his sense that these rights, hard won by the sacrifice of Canadians past, are under attack and on the verge of being lost. And that's still true. And I think that's probably true that you are in an unpaid career, but thank you for serving your country once more in this role.
Yeah, I'm finally getting paid what I'm worth, I guess, Rod. I'm getting zilch, not a.
So, as they usually say, well, we should double your wage, right? So,
Yes,
and also,
triple.
for those who don't know, I believe you were in the sky flying an airliner when 9/11 took place. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Matter of fact, I was on a trip from Quebec City to Toronto, and we launched just before everything started to happen. And we got airborne and things were normal. And then we got about 100 miles outside of Toronto, and then all of a sudden, Toronto Control cleared us to land. And we thought, what the heck is going on here? You never get cleared to land in Toronto International until you're right on top of the runway because it's so busy. And here we got clearance to land 100 miles out. And as it turned out, as we were taking off out of Quebec City, everything was unfolding, and people were losing their lives in cockpits, and it was just a terrible, terrible scene. And we didn't really find up and catch up to what was going on until we got into the ready room in Air Canada pilot ready room, and we were watching the TV and watching the buildings fall. It was incredible. I'll never forget that. That was an incredible time.
Yeah, there's a few incidents in our lives, world events that kind of do leave a mark on us, and like that's
Mm-hmm.
part of our memories as citizens. So, Russ, wanted to talk to you as a military person and someone who's knowledgeable, and we've talked in the past about the Ukraine, and we haven't talked for a little while. I just wanted to bring our listeners up to date with what you see going on in the Ukraine. And there's been a recent peace offer from Putin that, of course, isn't being warmly received by
Yep.
Zelensky. But maybe just bring us in and talk to us about what you see going on in the Ukraine and about this peace offer. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's well, the Ukraine situation has been a grand befuddlement to me because it's totally out of line with what Canadian foreign policy has kind of hung its hat on and preached in the past. I mean, Canada has always been on the world stage when we were at our height as a middle power back in the 50s and 60s. Say we had L.B. Pearson pick up the Nobel Peace Prize for the Suez Canal crisis in 1956 when he organized a peacekeeping operation. We are always on this world stage doing our best to make things better, to keep the peace, to have sides, sit down at a table and have a talk. We're always the disinterested interloper that would help two sides get together. And now I see what I see with Ukraine is just absolutely incredible. I mean, Canada is just beating the war drums. We're pumping billions of dollars into this war effort, this war machine into Ukraine, and all it's given Ukraine so far is the loss of a generation of young men. They're completely being decimated. They're losing a whole generation. And when you look at the conflict and the two sides, it's pretty obvious that Russia's not going to lose. I mean, they've got the resources, the size, the weight to win this thing, and there's something else going on here. It's just this is not Canada. This is not Canada's foreign policy. We are executing someone else's foreign policy, and I think that policy has a lot more to do with Western hegemony, world hegemony, and its maintenance than it has to do with any kind of betterment of the situation on the ground in Eastern Europe. And so we see, last tally I saw was like $10 billion going into Ukraine. Absolutely no tracking of this money. We don't know where it's going. We've seen all these stories about graft and corruption in Ukraine. We're seeing they're fighting for democracy on our behalf, and basically it's not a very democratic country. They've canceled elections year after year. It's quite draconian the way they're pressing people into service to throw them up on the front line of the Ukraine-Russian front lines. So this is. It just seems like we're just making a huge mistake. And you talk about peacekeeping offerings. We just had just a couple of days ago, Putin came out with an offer, and he's been pretty consistent with this. He says, "Look, if you promise not to join NATO, and give the people in the eastern Ukraine their autonomy, their language rights, then we're going to call it square. It's all going to be okay." And you would think that would at least be a starting point for some sort of negotiation, and then we see Prime Minister Trudeau and the rest of the Western leaders in Switzerland having a Ukraine-Russia peace conference. Russia wasn't there. Russia had tabled the peace offering, and they refused to talk about it. It was just otherworldly. It just doesn't make sense. So what are we doing there? I don't know. I think an awful lot of money is being laundered. That's the only thing I can see that is really being done efficiently in this Ukraine crisis.
Yeah, well, they've lost. I don't know what the number is now, but it was 500,000, 600,000 people have died in that conflict. Maybe you have a more accurate number.
No, I'm just in the hundreds of thousands, and the numbers are all over the place, and each side has its own tally count. But I do follow the battle lines as they're flowing back and forth, and it really seems like the Russians do have their strategy in place, and they've developed a huge steamroller that basically is biting into the Ukraine, and the Ukraine is running out of manpower. And now we see recent complaints by the Ukrainians, by Zelensky, saying they're not getting equipment fast enough, and it's just one big mess.
Yeah, well, and Putin has kind of he's maybe a pretty sharp card player, maybe sharper than the guy in the White House right now. by quite a bit, more shrewd. I don't have a high opinion on a moral scale, but he is a nationalist for his country for sure, and some of the aspects that seem to be ignored by the Western press and Western governments that are pushing this war are the fact that there are Russian people in the eastern part of Ukraine that were being mistreated by the Ukraine government, and actually having civil war going on there before Russia came in. And from their point of view, they said they came in to protect Russian people, Russian-speaking people. Of course, there's always geography involved and wanting to change border lines, which have changed in Europe over the centuries. There's been a lot of adjustment of borders. But anyway, Putin now has expanded this in the sense that he's got warships in Cuba right now. And,
okay. Yeah, there is. You're hitting on a good point, Rod. There's a history here. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, part of that breakup and part of that process involved an understanding that the Soviets asked for. They were deathly afraid that they were, if they broke up, the West, the NATO alliance would advance and take advantage. And part of the breakup agreement was the fact that the West promised. It was James Baker, Secretary of State at the time. He promised he promised the Russians that NATO would not advance eastward 1 inch. 1 inch was the term he used. That was the understanding. So things flowed from there. And then we have this whole history of Ukraine and Russia back and forth with basically Ukraine has kind of two sides to it. The West is more European looking, and the eastern part of the country is more looking towards Russia because that's they're Russian speakers and they have a history there with Russia. So this political scene has been back and forth, between these two, the West side and the East side. And in 2014, Yanukovych was the duly elected leader of Ukraine. He was a friend of the Russians. And in 2014, that's when we had the Maidan revolution with an awful lot of American help. Obama was in there, big time. CIA, NGOs were involved in raising up a revolution against the Yanukovych regime, forced him out. That whole process also involved members of the Azov battalion. It's a Nazi-orientated militia that helped greatly with that overthrow, with that Maidan overthrow of the duly elected government. And we can take it from there. And there, from that time onwards, Russia has been very, very consistent in saying, look, we see this advance of NATO into the Ukraine as an existential threat. Do not do it. You're forcing our hand. And it kept happening. And Biden, as late as 2021, was guaranteeing to Ukraine that they would become a member of NATO. So he was just throwing fuel on the fire. And sure enough, in February 2022, the Russians made the move. So, it wasn't like the narrative we hear in Canada today is that Russia was just all of a sudden stood up and invaded, for no cause. And that's not true. There was a lot of history here that they were basically poked and prodded into this whole thing. And now that they are engaged in a war, the West is determined to see the Ukrainians fight to the last man for Western democracy, and it's not serving Ukrainians' interests. It's not. I don't see how it's serving Canada's interest to see Ukraine be absolutely steamrolled like this. but here we go. We're being fed this narrative that we've got to see this through to the end, even if it means nuclear warfare. Well, this isn't crazy. This is crazy. You don't poke and prod the world's greatest nuclear power for what? I don't see anything that we're getting out of this. There's no national interest in this at all. Yeah, this is scary. And now we have, the whole thing has backfired because what we see now is the West, the NATO alliance, they've been very, very successful in forcing Russia to regenerate a military force that it hasn't had for decades. They've built up their military profile. They're producing armaments far in advance of what even America produces and the West produces. They are forming alliances that are going to help them in this existential war with Ukraine. They're now very, very much closer to China. Putin has recently made basically a non-aggression pact, a military pact with North Korea, who is producing weapons for them as well. Putin is just coming out of Vietnam, where he's signing agreements with that country. And what you have here is basically the biggest mistake that I think has ever happened in global affairs and in the world of foreign geostrategy. There was a theory posited lately in the 19th century, a heartland theory. And the heartland theory stated that if whoever controlled Asia, the continent of Asia, that basically controlled the world. And Asia was considered to be the heartland. And so that heartland now we see with Russia, with China, with North Korea. We see that basically the whole continent of Asia has come under, is Russian friendly. And we've just poked and prodded the bear to form a heartland alliance, which in the past has been accredited as being the way to control the world.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that all these sanctions that have been placed on Russia, well, it's forced them to go outside of the Western monetary system to make its own arrangements, its own financial arrangements, which it has done. And now Russia is announcing that they're not going to use the American dollar as a petrodollar. Saudi Arabia is now coming out and saying they're not going to use the American dollar as a petrodollar. So basically what we see is the whole underpinning of the American West financial system, the fact that the American dollar is the reserve currency, is going away. Because as soon as it stops being the petrodollar, its use as a reserve currency is limited.
Yeah.
So this is all backfired. It's all making us poor. It's not in our interests. It's not serving Ukraine. It's not serving anybody's interests except for maybe the folks who are desperately trying to maintain this Anglo-American empire hegemony over the world. Yeah.
Well, I remember. I'm old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I remember talking to my brother, who was 3 years younger than me, and I had told him what I had learned about that crisis, and I remember he started crying because it looks like we were on the verge of nuclear war. So I had to back off a little bit on my downloading to him the seriousness of the situation. But we don't have John Kennedy in the White House today, and I think Putin he's a student of history. I think he's studied all this stuff pretty carefully and certainly understands the weaknesses of the West. And this is not a good time to tangle with him.
Putin is a master at propaganda. He's coming out now and he's telling the world that the West has become corrupted and has decayed. It's lost its value system. He's saying that Russia is the last Christian nation. He's saying Russia is the last place that still holds Judeo-Christian ethics and values on high, that still believe in them and practice them. And And quite frankly, you say the most effective propaganda is the propaganda that's closest to the truth, and he's hitting the nail on the head there. Uh, so this whole thing about who's fighting for what becomes a very, very murky environment. When we're talking about our current world situation. And basically, the Cuban Missile Crisis, as you alluded to, we were very close, and we were very close because we were dealing with existential issues. The Americans had come to see Russian missiles in Cuba, as an existential threat. And once you get to that point, you're basically at a point where everything is on the table and anything goes. And that is the position that the West is trying to poke and prod Russia into an existential situation that they have no recourse but to strike back in full force. It was absolutely incredible.
And the American approach, there's I listened to both sides of the spectrum down there, or maybe the three sides of the spectrum. There's people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who are talking about America's forever wars, and kind of the as Eisenhower mentioned, the military-industrial complex. There's a lot of reasons where people can be led along to think, oh, this is for freedom, this is for democracy, this is the American way, and it may not be that at all. But Lindsey Graham, who's kind of one of the ones pushing this agenda, I think he really sees, oh, here's an opportunity for us to give Russia a black eye, and it won't cost American lives. The fact that it costs hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian lives and billions, probably ultimately trillions in armaments and contributions that way, doesn't seem to faze them at all. But these are lives, they're human lives as well, and it seems like it's not up to us to decide in the West how many Ukrainians ought to die for our, so-called dominance, I guess, on the world stage.
Well, I guess it's not up to us. We're in the West, we're supposed to have the political power. It's supposed to be government by the people, for the people. It's supposed to be that way. It is not being executed that way right now. We are not being listened to. And I think that's a great big reason why you see the government becoming so desperate in haranguing on this point of disinformation, misinformation. They say we have to stop this disinformation. Well, it's not so much disinformation; it's just people reacting against lies. They're being lied to. They know they're being lied to, and they're talking back.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to talk back because you're supposed to follow their lead.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the big reasons why we see the Canadian military. It can no longer retain its experienced members. They're walking out the door. They're not going along with the narratives that are being sold to them. I talk to guys in the military, and some say they just couldn't take it anymore. They were sick and tired of attending these Marxist-style, Maoist-style struggle sessions where they'd actually be put in a room and made to apologize for their whiteness or their privilege. That's absolutely incredible. How can you unify a military force, a fighting force, under the banner of diversity that makes everybody hate everybody?
Yeah.
So it's just, people are walking out the door. People are saying no. You're also seeing, and this is very interesting, you're seeing things like Freedom Convoy 2022, which quite frankly has kicked off a worldwide movement.
Right.
And this movement is gaining steam and gaining power like crazy in Europe right now. We saw Tommy Robinson 1 June. They called him a hooligan. He called for people to get together, gather in downtown London, and let's protest peacefully. And they called him a hooligan for wanting to do that. And at the end of the day, they had tens of thousands of people show up in downtown London. They had 800,000, 900,000 live streams going out on social media, recording the event. Unbelievable. And now on 27 July, he's saying, okay, folks, we showed that we could do this peacefully. We showed that we have a great interest in what's going on. Let's do this whole thing over again, 27 July, and have a freedom protest. And he's asking for the whole of England to come down.
Well,
I don't know. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens there. But I mean, around the world, you're seeing. Here's a neat one. Geert Wilders in Holland forming a government. He was the bad boy, the black sheep of Dutch politics for decades. But he and his party, his Freedom Party, got to the point where they're assuming political power. And we see in France, Marine Le Pen looks like she's going to form a government. And it looks like she's coming out right now and she's saying, look, we're going to start deporting people who shouldn't be here. We're going to, people who hate us and who want to commit violence on our soil, they're gone. And you know what? People aren't complaining about that that kind of an idea like they used to by calling it racist and xenophobic and whatever.
yeah.
No, it's things are really picking up steam here, and with the summer coming for election 2024. Remember what happened in election 2020 that summer? Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the States as we see the forces of wokeness lose their grip and become desperate. That's where they are becoming cornered rats.
Well, aside from those raised in the United States, they've got at least 10 million basically illegal immigrants that have crossed the border. And even if, as they say, if only a small percentage of them had evil intentions, they could cause a lot of damage. Well,
a lot of damage. And apparently there's something in the order of 80,000, tens of thousands of these newcomers, they call them now, are Chinese nationals.
Yeah.
They're coming across the border at the gap there, the Darien Gap. They're coming across the Darien Gap. And what are they up to? You know, fighting age Chinese men, Chinese nationals coming across the border into the States. Yeah, okay. Tell me this is not a threat.
Exactly. So I don't know if we want to move geographically to Gaza, to what's going on down there, or if we should save that for another day. But maybe you can make a few brief comments about what you see going on there.
Well, Canada's approach to Ukraine has befuddled me. There's no national interest in Canada helping the Ukrainians die. On the Gaza front, we are seeing another Canadian reversal on the global affairs stage, on the foreign geostrategy. If you go to global affairs site, you'll see even now Israel is cited as Canada's most important and primary ally in the Middle East, for good reason. It's a Western liberal democracy. We share a lot of we share the Judeo-Christian ethic, for goodness sakes. We share a way of life, and now we see Canada basically reversing itself on that policy point, and establishing an equivalency between Hamas, a recognized terrorist organization, and the Israeli Defense Force. This is absolutely incredible. It's absolutely uncalled for. It's absolutely done with an effort to erase the laws of war. The laws of war state, quite frankly, that if a belligerent is using civilians as a shield to prevent you from to allow them to conduct enemy operations against you, that you are authorized, given due notice and given all the precautions possible, you are authorized to go after targets that are protected by civilian shields as a matter of the Geneva Convention. This is not talked about in Canada. The narrative is one-sided, and it's put in place to establish an equivalency between terrorists and a nation, quite frankly, fighting for its life. This it's actually underhanded. It's a perversion of what Canada has stood for in the past.
Yeah. So we've got two powder kegs. Actually, they're not even powder kegs. There's open conflict going on in Ukraine and in Middle East. Either one of which, or both of which, I mean, they certainly both have caused the realignment of alliances, I guess. They've caused economic disruption and are going to cause more. It's shaken the confidence, I think, of the world in our ability to, there's been a myth for years that, as we've become more civilized, so-called, advanced, the old evolutionary idea that we're becoming a more noble people, focused on peace and freedom and so on. We've seen more conflict and disruption and contrary behavior by governments in the West, where we're supposed to have these freedoms and supposed to relish the concepts of humanity, the treating humanity as we'd like to be treated ourselves. So a lot of that is gone by the wayside, and it seems like the powers that be, the industrial military complex, is pushing the buttons, and there don't seem to be too many politicians standing up to say stop doing that.
You have to ask why. And I think in the West, when you talk about our success, our nobility, I think the secret sauce in all of that has really been freedom of speech. Because as long as we've been able to discuss different points of view, have debates, have the ability to change other people's minds and have them change our minds, you're on pretty solid ground there with regards to, keeping the peace, because you're spending a lot of time trying to understand the other side of the story. And that whole freedom of speech thing, we, if not lost it totally, it's going rapidly, and we can see it over the last 9 years of this Liberal government, where they've actually gone out of their way to curtail freedom of speech, to actually bring in laws like Bill C-63 that call for the house arrest of people who might say something that might be hateful in the future. This is pre-crime. It's thought crime. It's absolutely 1984-ish. It's something that Canada has never ever stood for, and but we see it being shoved down our throats as a good thing, because there's too much disinformation. There's too much. You have to listen. How can you listen to us if you're listening to disinformation and hateful information? And now we have a electronic billboard truck in Toronto going around the streets, and it's advertising. It's asking questions like, "Is this Canada or is this Syria?" And it shows pictures of people in a busy thoroughfare, bowing, praying at Muslim prayer time, basically disrupting the whole community, disrupting the whole traffic flow. And so I think when you look at the Gaza instance and you look at the reaction here in Canada by various elements, you are seeing this come home big time, because people are looking at what's going on our college campuses. I guess, did you hear that at McGill they actually there's actually a Marxist-style revolutionary program being taught on the grounds where the tent encampment is. So this is like China 1960s is what we're looking at. Struggle sessions in the military, China 1960s. No, so this is all coming home to roost, and it's good. It's hard to say how it's going to play out, but I can't see this playing out in a very peaceful fashion, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, I certainly thank you with your military background and understanding of things and your experience for helping us to get another perspective on things. I guess now I should say, and so what do we do about it other than informing, as both you and I are trying to do through podcasts and other means, informing our fellow citizens of some of these dangers. What would be practical steps to try to move Canada in a more sensible direction regarding things like Ukraine?
I think you're right. I think I've always said, two things: show up, don't quit. You do those two things, I think we're going to be okay. We're seeing people stand up all around the world, and quite frankly, I got to give chaps like you credit, Rod, for coming out and discussing these issues, for making them current, for putting them in people's minds, because it's funny how ideas travel. They travel faster than the speed of light, and I think we're seeing it now. So those two things: show up, don't quit, and I mean all the rest of the stuff. I guess the other thing you could do is pray. I really think there's a big part for prayer in all of this, because quite frankly, I think prayers are in the process of being answered right now.
Very good. Well, thank you. And folks want to follow you and your work, your articles, c3rf.org. Is that correct?
It's Canadian Citizens with an S on the end, plural, CanadianCitizens.org. You can go there. We have our updates are up there. I try on a regular basis to, comment on the issues of the week. I've always thought, how can I come up with things on a weekly basis to talk about? But I tell you, every week there's something crazy and new that the government's trying to pull on us. So there's no problem at all.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. CanadianCitizens.org.
CanadianCitizens.org. So thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us this week, and God bless you in your ongoing work defending freedom. And maybe we should triple your wage at least. So, all right.
Quadruple. I'm worth quadruple the price.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks so much, and may the rest of this year have some good surprises for us, and not all doom and gloom. We want to report on it.
I think I will. I think I will. Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, Russ. Take care.
Okay. Bye, Rod. Pleasure.